Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/PSW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. Endgame automates the hunt for both known and never-before-seen adversaries in enterprise networks. Built on unique knowledge on the adversary's tools, techniques, and tactics, Endgame's centrally managed agent prevents, detects, and responds to advanced adversaries in the earliest stages of the kill chain without prior knowledge. Endgame. Automate the hunt. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. This is the security news for this week. Joff, you wanted to make a shout-out before we get started?
Yeah, look, first of all, just on that tech seg I just want to give huge props to Josh Wright. Josh Wright has done a lot of research in the mobile space, and if you're interested in learning more about mobile pen testing, you should definitely look into SEC 575, which is the SANS mobile application pen testing class. Definitely worth a look. So that's it.
Awesome. So apparently, Microsoft's new Azure tool is trying to outlaw terrible passwords. What do you guys think of that?
Define terrible.
That's a good, but that's a great question, Kevin. My thought on this article was, when I read it, I was like, we could almost extend that, and I think we have to answer Kevin's question first. What's a terrible password, right? And I think there's two approaches. One that we've seen sort of in the wild, right? Like, sites have attempted to say, no, that's a terrible password, you can't use it, right? Like, if it's less than 8 characters or the ridiculous rules they put in place, and we're like, you can still kind of get around those rules and still implement a terrible password. Which I guess maybe we could define as one that's easily guessed, would be one criteria, right? So then I'm like, I was talking with, I think it was Gabriel Gums from StealthBits, and he was saying when you audit passwords in your own AD environment, he's like, if you have StealthBits technology, for example, and he said, very well you could be using other technologies. He didn't want it to sound like a vendor pitch, but he's like, as people set passwords, you can have a list of maybe passwords that might meet the criteria that are still, in fact, terrible passwords that are easily guessable, right? And, I mean, this is known to all, many of us listening to the show, right? I need 8 characters, an uppercase letter, at least one number, and maybe a special character, so people end up with password 123 exclamation point, which is in everyone's dictionary. I think taking that a step further might be taking those dictionaries, and in addition to enforcing password policy rules, saying your password can't be one of these basically terrible passwords that everyone is trying to guess. And I think that's a strategy that I don't think has really permeated, except also in the news this week was Mozilla is implementing the Have I Been Pwned database inside the browser in an upcoming release. In other words, if you choose a password that's in the Have I Been Pwned database, Firefox is like, yeah, no, you don't want to use that password. I think while this is not necessarily like the panacea of password solutions, I think it's going to help people choose a better password, at least one that's not going to be easily guessable inside of people's password dictionaries.
Yeah, I like that entirely approach. Agree with that. And now reading this article, I guess Azure's solution to this is they're implementing the 500 most common passwords based on, I guess, either breaches or their own research. It doesn't actually say. But I imagine that in combination with what you're referring to, Paul, with Have It Been Pwned or many of these data breaches where you have such a large sample set of passwords and actually providing that forward and back to the user, that could have an effect downstream of at least making it a little bit more challenging for
I was going to say that, look, I have customers. I have customers that have actually looked at and are implementing custom solutions to get into the password change process and filter through, those very large databases that we all use for cracking, such as CrackStation, RockU.com, all that stuff that's out there. and actually preventing their users from choosing those passwords. And so it sounds like Microsoft's listening to their customers and actually bringing that in-house. That's the feeling I'm getting.
It's another like positive thing that Microsoft is doing today. It's even in the light of just computer security. I think Microsoft is doing a great job, and it's kind of interesting when we look at our almost 14-year history of doing the show. We didn't always necessarily say that of Microsoft, but here I am today praising them on many of their efforts, and I think this one included, because while we, I think, are pretty much agreeing that it's not going to solve the password problem entirely, right? But it could potentially make an impact. And one of the things that, Jason and Joff especially, you guys are doing penetration testing today, one of the things that I always love to do as a pen tester, and even as an internal pen tester especially, is go to the various groups or somehow discover a password that you're like, wow, this one looks like it should have been changed a while ago. Or you go to the groups and you're like, yeah, everyone kind of has that password or that set of passwords that they're like, as we were implementing systems, we used this as one of our defaults. And then at some point we realized we shouldn't ever be using this password ever again. So we're going to go to all of our systems, we're going to change that password, and we're going to move on with life. But as we know, as pen testers, auditors, whatever, if you're assessing the security of an organization, you catch wind of one of those passwords, you're like, wow, try that on every system. Like, it doesn't matter if it's Windows, if it's Cisco devices, right, Jason? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, just try it, and lo and behold, maybe you'll get into 0.5% of the systems, and that's really all you need. So what I'm advocating for is to understand what those previous passwords are that you might have used, that should be gone from your systems, and identify the systems that still have those so you can fix it on an automated level. And moving forward, make sure no one can ever use that password again on any system as much as you can. In Active Directory, that's a little easier. A lot of tools exist to compare it against the password list and say, hey, no, even though your password might be considered secure by the policy, it's on a list of like, no-go passwords. I think that's a valid strategy for organizations.
I do, and you know what, Paul?
Hold on, Jason.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say it'd be nice if Microsoft would implement this in Active Directory in general. I mean, all we have out of the box is uppercase, lowercase, and a special character for complex. Or anyhow, you've got 3 out of 4 potential categories you can hit, right? And then it's secure, right? If they could add in something like this, I mean, they say 500 most common, easily guessed passwords, including about 1 million of the most frequent character substitutions. That would really screw up some of these password guessing attacks, make it really difficult to pull off on a penetration test, without spending a lot of time and causing some havoc.
Yeah, I make the counter argument a little bit, though, because it is a moving target, right? So you implement that. Okay, great. It's done. Now we know that the database of, X 100,000 passwords are off limits. We just build a new one that is the next 100,000.
Well, and Joff, you're absolutely right. I think for targeted attacks, right, if you've gathered this much intelligence, you go, okay, I'm going to create a custom dictionary, as we know is we've done probably several technical segments on how to do that. Then I'm going to go to whatever the standard password dictionary is that I know that they're not using. I'm going to eliminate that from my password dictionary. Whatever's left over, that's what I'm going to attack you with.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so it's not a panacea. I guess that's the cautionary note, right? Nothing's perfect. Passwords are flawed technology, but I think all of us take heart in the fact that multi-factor authentication is now becoming firmly embedded in a lot of organizations' psychology and process, and that's a very, very healthy step, as well as some of the bio.
Well, sure, and there are of course ways around that too. I know there's people listening going, well, there's two-factor authentication bypasses. Like, look, I like to think of security as it relates to how I monitor my kids to make sure they don't drown in my pool, right? And obviously the risk factor is really high. The impact of that is really high. the likelihood is really high. If you look at the statistics about accidental deaths in children, the most common one is drowning. Okay, so we know that. So we're going to build in multiple steps, right? Like there's a gate at the bottom of the stairs, and that's got, you know, some kind of lock on it. There's a gate at the top of the stairs. That's got another lock on it. There's another gate that's in front of the pool, right? There's a camera system that monitors it. The gates to the outside are locked. However, that doesn't prevent me from teaching my kids how to swim, which relates to security awareness and education, right? And also, I never let my eyes off my kids now when the pool's open, even when it's not open. You can't let the kids go unmonitored in the backyard. Even if they do know how to swim, you got to have an adult keeping an eye on them. So I don't want to call that defense in depth, right? I think that's really just understanding your risk.
Multiple layers.
Yeah, right? and building in, you know, all of those different protections, but also keeping that monitoring piece on it as well. I think we need to, and a lot of people do, a lot of organizations do, ensure the more difficult pen test, right? Do all of those multiple things. And really, I think that what it comes down to is you're just making it more difficult for an attacker to get in. I'm making it more difficult for my kids to go into the pool so that I have more time to be able to monitor that and react to some kind of condition that might be happening. I think we need to do the same thing in our networks. I think a lot of what we've preached as good security is really about making it more difficult, which gives us more time to be able to react to something that could lead to something bad happening.
Absolutely. Look, I've done a number of recent pen tests which have been transparent, right? They're not red teaming exercises, but where I encourage the organization, which I always do in the transparent exercises, to give me a daily report of the alerts that I generated, right?
Sure.
And I include that daily report as an appendix to the final deliverable as part of the engagement, and I reference at every step where they would have stopped an actual attack. And I think that's really, really valuable to interact with your customer in that way, and it's really, really valuable for an organization to understand that they could have stopped a legitimate attack in that particular context. Now, okay, there's going to be some critics out there that will say, well, pen tests are a falsely created context, but I would fight back with that and saying, look, they're not. Real attackers really are using the same techniques, and if this organization gets a sense that actually they have a little bit of confidence that they would have stopped us in the attack path based on the kind of evidence that I was generating, then that's an excellent result, right? That's what you want.
Yeah, just to kind of tie into the next story about observing different attacks, that and this, I think I put this more of an application security context. And the title is, oh my God, I just received someone else's security camera footage, right? And we saw this with tap lock as well. Like, oh my God, I can figure out the location and potentially unlock someone else's lock that I shouldn't be able to do. And I think that session handling in applications is still an area that needs to receive a lot of attention, largely because, well, we might be implementing Agile and DevOps and all these wonderful things, which are great, don't get me wrong, that you still need to have a human testing, and they have to be testing for certain conditions. To me, in applications, that session handling has always been problematic for dynamic testing. It's always been problematic for unit testing. It's just a difficult problem to address that oftentimes an external attacker or threat actor will be able to exploit because largely it hasn't been tested for.
Absolutely. It's... No, you're look, the world's not perfect, right? I mean, pen testing companies and everything we do, threat emulation's a big deal, right? We've got to be able to threat emulate the best we can. But there does come, you do come to that threshold, right?
Yeah.
We're not criminals, or at least I like to think we're not criminals.
Right. And Jeff, the shiny, one of the other examples when we talk about add-ons for Chrome, right? We covered a story this week that, Chrome is going to be more of a walled garden in terms of its add-ons for its browser. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, how many organizations actually test, their OS can be patched, their browser can be patched, but what if a malicious add-on for Chrome gets added into the mix?
They don't, right?
Right. That's not something that a pen tester would typically do. Like, I'm not going to go as a pen tester, take over someone's Google Chrome. Like, I'm not going to phish the Google Chrome add-on developer, get them to submit their password, take over their account, and then update their add-on in hopes that someone's going to install it. Typically, that's not something, that a pen tester would do, but that's certainly an attack vector that we have to understand and put in context, and not so much in a penetration test, but in a philosophical threat modeling context, that's a real threat vector. And in fact, one of my concerns today in information security is the security of things like add-ons for the web browser, for WordPress, for Drupal, for any number of these ecosystems, phones, and you talked about Android and even iOS, as much as they've done to protect it. Apple's still pulling out crypto mining apps from its store today is another, headline that I saw. I think it's a real threat vector. I think it's going to be really hard to put that in context in for organizations as a real security threat, because largely it's not something we can really test ethically necessarily.
Yeah, well, so the interesting thing about browsers, right, just alone, the browser has become an operating system unto itself, right? This thing has sandboxing ability. It's running multiple threads. It's running, separated processes. This thing, the browser is becoming its own operating system platform.
Sure.
And you're absolutely right, or not is becoming, has become for some time. But you're absolutely right. I don't think penetration testing companies at this point are actually truly modeling or even have the capability of modeling what the threats would be in that particular ecosystem. We're looking more in the operating system and the app ecosystem outside of the browser. And that's a wide open area. I think you hit on an important point. Just like when I just talked about in TechSeg prior, people not looking at the fact that many of the enterprise apps now have moved to a combination of cloud and mobile platform and have nothing to do with the traditional operating platform anymore.
Yeah, it's where I really like attack simulation, and I look at that as a trend that I think is fantastic, because we're like, look, let's say someone got in, it doesn't matter how. Maybe there was an add-on that they took over and they got access to a browser. Okay, so how do we detect that? And how do we simulate that attack? Not just the attack, but the foothold. So I guess attack simulation is kind of weird, right? It's not the actual exploit. Okay, I've gained a foothold into a workstation and it's doing stuff. Can you detect that stuff? Because trying to predict and defend against all those external threats is really hard. But if we can kill it as soon as we can and not let it permeate for months or years or whatever, there's a win. And I think that's where attack simulation can help you improve your defenses. Basically going, look, someone's going to get in. We said that for years on the show. Someone's going to get into one of your systems. Let's limit what they can do and also increase our time to detection. That's where I like attack simulation as a valid strategy for enterprises. And I'm not saying not do pen tests. Don't, have someone review your applications. Have someone do pen tests. There's great benefit there. But also do this attack simulation, because you don't know what the next attack vector is going to be.
Well, I think it's pen test strategically is what I tell people. Think about what keeps you up at night. Really put some thought into this. Don't just get an off-the-shelf pen test. Think about what is really keeping you up. What is going to be the worst thing that could possibly happen to your organization? Is it an event that takes over a browser? Then reach to the market and ask them for those services.
You know what? The analogy that I love on this, Joff, we haven't talked about it in this show. We talked about Enterprise Security Weekly, and Dave Kennedy, actually disclosed some of his, health problems he had, and he related it to the medical field. And I thought it was a good analogy. He said, look, when you get a health problem, you might go to your local walk-in ER. You might go to a hospital ER. You might go to your general practitioner for various reasons. Could be emergency, could be not. You've got some issue. They're going to evaluate your issue and go, oh, you need to go to a specialist for that, right? And your specialist is going to work with you on that particular issue. And what you're saying is along the lines of what Dave is saying, right? Sure, you do your general stuff, but if you got stuff you're specifically concerned about, like in the case of your health, you're going to go to a specialist. I think it's the same thing when you assess your security. If you got something you're specifically concerned about, as Joff is saying, you're going to go find a specialist in that area or someone that has a specialist in that area to test for that condition.
That's absolutely right. And I think that's where the penetration testing industry is going to evolve to. The generalized condition is going to become automated. There's no doubt about it. It doesn't mean pen testing is dead. It means pen testing becomes more specialized. Yes. And I think the medical analogy is the perfect analogy. I think that's right on target.
Oh, and so speaking of plugins and stuff, we've got an unpatched WordPress vulnerability. Now, this one I don't think is one to...
Oh, surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise. Now, this is in the core code, but it could allow low-privileged users, which means they have to have an account on your WordPress system in order to do this. And from what I've read, it allows people to delete things and doesn't really allow anything beyond that. And while we know WordPress security is very poor, I don't think this is a case where you need to sound the alarm.
Yeah, fair enough.
Could you have prevented this with a WAF, Paul?
Absolutely. I mean, because a WAF has machine learning and artificial intelligence, which allows it to predict which attacks could come at it, whether they've been developed or publicized or not, Kevin.
What kind
it
of
just protects you from everything.
Was that?
It's less than 0 day, if you will.
It's less than 0 day. It's minus one. It's minus one.
5 day, baby.
That's right. This is my new marketing term. It's minus 5 days, Jobs, and minus 5 day protection from all your vulnerabilities and exploits.
We all just made $1 billion with that term.
It's my new product.
Awesome. Minus 5 day. TM, it's done.
There was just crazy news. Apparently, if you want to take over your Nintendo Switch, right, that pirates are using anti-piracy measures to protect its own paid software that helps others to run pirated games on Nintendo Switches. So this is like you're protecting your own pirated devices. It's not your device. You're the software provider that's providing pirated software, and you're making sure no other pirated software get. This is just like, it's like the Apple model for nefarious pirated software. It's craziness.
The irony's not lost on me, although they took a fairly proactive approach of defending themselves, defending air quotes, because they brick your Switch if they detect other piracy software on it.
It's crazy.
That's a pretty hardcore position.
It's hardcore.
Right?
It's hardcore.
Yeah, it is.
Sorry, your Switch is gone.
Wow. Jason, you and I had this story about Windows 10 security that can be bypassed.
Yeah, I thought this one was kind of interesting. A researcher found is looking at different. Was it Matt Nelson from SpectreOps was looking at different file extensions and how the operating system handles it. And it's basically there's a file extension called .setting content-ms file, which interacts with the control panel. And it allows you to run software that's supposedly blacklisted, the way I understood it, inside of Windows 10.
And this was part of
what was also
OLE, right? Object linking and embedding, which I think is really a hacker's dream in terms of functionality, because it allows, basically is set up to allow for execution of code. I mean, that's really what it's set up for. And that's our goal as attackers. So, yeah.
The interesting part, too, is that when he reported it up to Microsoft, MSRC responded with a note saying the severity of the issue is below the bar for servicing and the case will be closed.
Which is typically at Microsoft's response to OLE vulnerabilities. They're like, well, it's functioning as designed. Like, OLE allows you to run code, and you should be able to run code, and that's great. And usually they come around, as they did with the previous strain of bugs in OLE, but as much.
My thought was they'll probably change their tune when people started using it.
Well, that's exactly what happens, right? Like as soon as it ends up in Metasploit, for example, vendors tend to fix it. So Microsoft was doing so good till we got to that story, Jason. Thanks for...
Man, I was going to say, you just dogged them. I mean, we just had all the love.
They were doing so good. And they do so well until we get to certain things, and object linking and embedding is just one of those things that when we get to, it's like, oh, not only is it bad, Microsoft's response to vulnerabilities in that functionality is also bad.
Yeah, it's the Office group. I love you, Office group, but you're all about functionality and not so much about security. We know it.
I mean, well, that could be it's a great point, Jeff. That could be a cultural thing at Microsoft where the Office team is just like, security? Like, no, we want to provide functionality. Like, screw security. And I think they're very skewed from what we've seen, analyzing vulnerabilities in this industry, right? They're very skewed towards functionality and not really wired to provide security, and that's largely what we've seen with Office. Especially, if you're a security researcher or practitioner, and you haven't looked into object linking embedding, you should just read it, because I guarantee you,
do it
at at various levels, you're going to be shocked. You're like, what? Like, this is everything I've been looking for in terms of having exploits for Microsoft, right?
Yeah, love them, but they're definitely skewed towards functionality, and we thank you. I mean, in the pen testing community, appreciate it. We love the opening.
So apparently, Ticketmaster was hacked in the breaches of the week. Everyone was reporting how Ticketmaster was hacked and personal information was leaking.
Oh my! They're tossing a third party under the bus.
Oh, is that?
I was going to say. I bet every one of us has probably got a database entry with Ticketmaster.
Right?
They're claiming it's just contained to the UK, so it's not everybody, fortunately. Unfortunately for those in the UK, but they are immediately blaming, and I quote from this article, a third-party artificial intelligence tech supplier.
Chatbot.
Yeah, that sounds like a really interesting BS line.
Well, and I think companies today are going to be held liable for a breach, whether it's result of a third party or not. I mean, that's traditionally, you look past in the breaches, like, you're going to suffer the consequences of that breach in many different facets, regardless of whether it was a third party or not. And I think that when I look at the consequences of a breach, they extend far beyond what we call public relations. They extend far beyond any kind of fines. There's a morale issue that I think comes into play for that organization after they suffer a breach. There's the, if you've read the Phoenix Project, there's a lot of unplanned work that largely happens as a result of a breach if you work for that company, right? There's a firefighting drill that happens that costs that company a lot of money. Not just the direct cost of responding, but the indirect cost that employees are now working on responding to the breach rather than working on what they were working on before the breach happened. So I think that has to play into when you plan for security, budgetary spending, implementing solutions, hiring people. You have to account for all of those costs. So I want to talk about another story. Oh, a big one that we're missing that we haven't talked about yet is WPA3. Now, I don't know. I read about WPA3. I wasn't overly impressed with the security improvements that they're making in WPA3. However, I want to get Larry's take on it. Also, I'd reach out to Josh Wright for commentary and others in the Wi-Fi space. I mean, what's your guys' assessment of this WPA3?
Well, I'm excited that they're finally killing WPS. That's great. From a security standpoint, we all win because of that. That has been a crippling thing for particularly home users and default configurations of routers. So I am pumped on that. Unfortunately, WPA3 is still 5 years away probably, but I'm interested to see when that finally rolls out. The second aspect that I'm interested in, particularly to see how it plays in the real world, is they're changing how open wireless networks work. They're, from what I've read, effectively introducing client isolation per client as a means to try and tamper down passive monitoring, even for open wireless networks, by isolating clients from one another. So you can't just sit there and sniff traffic to see essentially what somebody's doing. So that's a bonus. If that works in the real world, that could have actually a great impact on your coffee shop or your airport.
I did read that, Kevin, that there was some provisions in WPA3 for some kind of layer 2 separation and securing layer 2, which has always been, I mean, let's be honest, a lot of Wi-Fi's issues stem from that layer 2.
Yeah, but
everyone can see all that traffic.
The practical implementations of just about every enterprise wireless network out there has layer 2 peer-to-peer traffic suppression as a switch that you can turn on just about any controller. So, I mean, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, who cares? Big deal. It's already there.
That's entirely correct. And I think what makes this more valuable, again, it's not released, so we don't know what it looks like. Enterprise is one problem. You flip a toggle, you see that ostensibly. An airport, a home, grandma, that's a very different threat model. The simplicity and default configurations of open wireless networks is the downfall of wireless. By forcing client isolation, that has a net benefit. Hopefully it works.
All right, I'll give it.
But also it doesn't. Well, it doesn't prevent, but also doesn't prevent clients from beaconing and searching out for networks either.
So yeah, it's never going to solve the man-in-the-middle problem.
Right.
But the default passive monitoring of just getting, your TP-Link wireless card and sitting there and listening, at least it will help address that. And I think that's a great thing. Again, hopefully it actually works.
Well, I think we need to dig into it more as it evolves in WPA3. I think it's significant, and we won't understand the significance till we dig into it more and some more time passes, because we're still in the early stages, right? Because are there access points that are implementing it today?
I think it's still in not even the standards phase. It's more for requests for comments at this point. So we're still fairly far out from any vendor adopting this as an actual standard, which is unfortunate, because I'd like to see this tomorrow.
Yeah, you'll see people adopt, though. I mean, we saw that with 802.11i. You had pre-standards adoption, and you'll see the same thing here with WPA3. There'll be vendors that jump on board.
Well, I think it'll be slower.
Competitive advantage.
Like we saw WEP, and we were like, "Holy crap, that's really broken." And I think that the adoption was very rapid, because they were like, well, WEP is really broken, right? So we need WPA. I think now we're kind of like lulled into this, well, what we have is pretty secure, so if something comes out that's a little more secure, I think we're going to see a slower adoption.
I need to do more reading.
One interesting thing about that they're planning for WPA3 is introducing, for networks that are utilizing pre-shared keys, forward secrecy. So that if you do compromise the key, you can't go back in time to decrypt prior traffic.
Interesting.
So that's an interesting threat model that they're introducing. Again, I'd like to see it in actual practice, but there are some good things I think coming out of WPA. I'm excited to see it once it starts rolling out.
Ridiculous stories of the week. Are we there yet?
Is that the final? I do have two stories that I think are worthwhile talking about.
Okay, Kevin, go with your two stories.
So we talked about Ticketmaster, which I think has taken a lot of the industry news, if you will, when it comes to breaches, although it's kind of overshadowed one that I think is unfortunately much more serious. Exactus is a organization that decided to leave exposed to the internet files on what is ostensibly every single citizen of this country. 340 million records. And if you think about the total population, that's almost 100% of very specific targeted information. Do you smoke? Do you have cat? What's your tar type? Things that advertisers would use was entirely available on the internet. That's in the Equifax level of breaches and super bad things. So once again,
they're nice.
Got a marketing firm for that one. The second article I'd like to touch on is that just prior to the show launching, Gentoo put out an announcement stating that their GitHub account was taken over, and that anything currently hosted should be considered compromised. Now, it's important to note that core infrastructure, if you're using rsync, is very independent of that, but anything on GitHub should be considered hostile. They're still
so
working.
I see, like, if you had Gen 2 and you did an update, that's typically an rsync operation that goes to a different set of servers independent of their GitHub installation.
Correct, yeah. Okay. That's a very important distinction, but this is kind of still breaking in the moment. So as of their last posting, they're still learning to determine the impact and regain control to their GitHub.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting, like, if what has transpired since their GitHub has been compromised, has stuff made it from their GitHub into their production repos that people are using in production. Sounds like they're still doing that analysis.
So yeah, they're from what I'm reading, their master build is done entirely independent of GitHub. So hopefully this is not as serious as it sounds, but it's worth calling it just for those who do use GitHub, or excuse me, not GitHub, Gen 2 in production to keep an eye on this one.
And I mean, if you're using Gen 2 in production successfully, I've got like so much respect for you. It is just like an amazing, amazing distribution.
I know that is like hardcore. Like, I'm going to do it the right way every time. Like, I mean, there's a human literally umbilically attached to every Gen 2 server. Right.
Yeah, I think you're right, Joff. It's an awesome distribution. Requires a lot of knowledge, care, feeding, tuning, tweaking. But the benefit of doing all that is you get a very highly optimized system. I think some of the downside that I've seen, even with very, very experienced people in Linux, is you just you reach a point with your system where you're like, my dependencies are just so out of control, like nothing really works anymore, and I got to start over. And these are even more experienced Linux people, and so I mean, Gen 2 is a commitment, and it's awesome that they give you that much control. Obviously, with that much control comes a lot of responsibility and a lot of time, but you know, a lot of respect for people that are doing it.
There is a place for it in very siloed places in organizational structure or what I call a deployment or operational structure. For example, I'll throw myself under the bus. I used to run OpenBSD, right?
Yeah, I did too.
A DNS infrastructure, and that was all it was. Straight up OpenBSD. Now, if there was a problem, it was compile from source. Like no fucking around, right? I mean, you were recompiling bind 9 and or the kernel, right? From source.
I tell you what, though, it worked better than Gen 2 back in the day, anyway.
Oh, damn straight. And I am proud to say, in the decade that I ran that, my DNS infrastructure was never compromised.
Yeah, and certainly secure. I mean, it's had issues like anything else, but in the grand scheme of things, very secure.
Yep.
Now, speaking of security and covering your butt, I wanted like a public service announcement that there's an article in the show notes that advises everyone that if you're suffering from itchy bum kind of issues, that you should stop wiping so hard. Very serious. This was a legit article that came across my news feed.
Back off of the wiping.
It's a public service announcement about, I don't know how you were taught to wipe, what wiping practices you have now. We're not talking about your computer. We're talking about you. You can read it for yourself. Anyway, I don't know how did that end up in there?
Weird.
Up in there. Anyway, the funny story of the week, because the wiping your butt is certainly a public service announcement. I care about everyone who listens to the show and your butts, I guess. Anyway, Toronto cops are in big trouble for eating weed edibles and calling backup on themselves. So apparently, you can read all the details for yourself. There were 2 police officers. They were responding to a call at a dispensary in Canada. Canada is a country where marijuana is legal now, or is going to be legal very close to...
They're not alone. That's happening in the United States.
It is in certain states, but Canada as a whole, as a country, has legalized marijuana. So anyway, 2 police officers in Canada responded to a call at a dispensary. Apparently, some edibles went missing. Marijuana-infused chocolates of some kind went missing. And when you read the article, basically, the police officers had them in their possession. They went to another call while they were observing on a stakeout, if you were. You know, they got hungry, naturally, as anyone does on a stakeout. And so they started eating the edibles and proceeded to get ridiculously high, so much so that one of them called, a police officer called 911 on themselves because they thought they were dying.
And the other one called for backup.
And the other one called for backup.
They called emergency on themselves.
On themselves.
Yes.
I think I'm dying. I'm a cop.
Yeah, he says he thought he was going to pass out, so he put in a distress call. One of the guys.
Now, in case you're wondering, like, kind of like how this went down and like what happened, there is video evidence of one of the officers singing the song "Because I Got High" as part of the evidence. They have, just picture that. In full police uniform is kind of how I picture it, singing that song. The officers have been placed on leave with pay, by the way, in case you were wondering about that. And they are facing 4 misconduct charges, and the other officers facing 6, and again, both having suspended with pay. Oh, the other officer apparently had their arms crossed, along with the Bruno Mars song they were singing, Versace on the Floor, was his or her choice of song to sing. Apparently they were feeling pretty good to sing after eating an entire bag of edibles, apparently. You wonder, now last week we covered the story about the couple that was selling tickets to heaven, and someone sent me like the disclaimer on Snopes that was totally fake, which we kind of speculated when we were talking about it, like, this can't be real, right? And, you know, I think all of these stories that we cover in this ridiculous news section are kind of like, is this really real? Like, did someone make this up? Because it's oddly specific about... Anyway, so we'll see if this one gets disproved by our listeners, but it's entertaining read nonetheless, to take a deviation from your reading about vulnerabilities and breaches and exploits and tools and all that stuff, to just read a really funny story about basically 2 police officers that ate a whole bag of edibles. I just think that's funny. I don't know why.
Yeah, well, crap happens, right? And and fun crap happens. And this was one under the category of fun crap happened.
I mean, you kind of wonder, like, did they know that it was marijuana-infused edibles and just, get hungry? But then the story starts off with, like, they didn't raid, but they were, like, responding to a call at dispensary, so they had to know that it was a dispensary, and whatever edible objects they had were likely infused with marijuana, and still proceeded to eat the entire bag.
Yeah, they had to know.
They had to know.
Just saying, they had to know. Hey, we got to wrap this thing up. So,
anyway, thank you all for listening and watching the show. Thank you all for participating. Thanks to Tom and Gary for our previous interview on the show. It was awesome. And, hey, PSA, there's a couple of articles in there, wiping your butt. And don't eat too many edibles, I guess, is the moral of the story, for this one. So with that, thank you, everyone. That concludes this episode of Paul Security Weekly. Over and out.